sentences more or less describe how search engines work and have worked for decades. So our library tools are kind of growing these vestigial AI appendages, but they don't seem functionally distinct enough from the search algorithms we regularly employ to add broad value to our services. At least that's how I'm kind of seeing it. Again, like I'm dubious that something of quality can be created in such a short period of time. LexisNexis has been working on their Lexis AI for a few years now. It even uses retrieval augmented generation, which is purported to stop hallucinations, and it's still not particularly trustworthy. There's a Stanford paper making the rounds right now that tested a bunch of legal AIs, including Lexis's, I think the Thomson Reuters one. Rather than make cases up, it misattributes them. But because a misattribution isn't a hallucination, their sales pitch just flat states that their AI doesn't hallucinate, which I guess is kind of true, but it's not making up legal decisions, which is an improvement, but you still need subject-specific expertise to use the tool responsibly. And I think that's kind of the core issue here. The success of AI as a product is going to live or die depending on the monetization of its mass appeal. We need to consider what happens if a mass use case for AI never materializes, because that's ultimately what's driving the investment. This is being touted as, the next global revolution or digital revolution, like personal computing or the internet. Global investment in AI is in the 12-figure range now. So the last time I checked, it was around $200 billion. But there's no finished AI product out on the market that looks even near capable of recouping that investment, nonetheless creating a return. This is looking increasingly like a speculative bubble. So let's say none of these companies are able to reliably replace human labor at scale, or we don't get self-driving vehicles. What happens? So I'm worried about three things in particular. Getting locked into multi-year contracts where we continue to pay for a service is no longer supported. Even before ProQuest or Clarivate rolled out their latest plan to stop selling books, eBook Central was relying on Adobe Digital Editions to support the download of titles. But ADE was abandoned, I think, in 2018. And I thought this created a degree of user hostility. Like I was dealing with regular user requests to download books, and I had to take them through the ADE instructions, which are terrible. I'm worried that resources that are being allocated to developing AI tools could be put elsewhere to make tangible improvements to services we already use. At best, it's going to leave us with tools that have some degree of obsolescence or user hostility in our services as companies allocate resources in one space instead of another. So EBSCO, I think, is a good example of that. They have their AI. Of course, they have their AI. But they also have their new Discovery UI that had a really rough rollout, and it's still lacking features. Yeah. And more than anything, I'm concerned that the fallback plan for many companies is to strip services for parts when they don't perform. With AI, our user inputs are probably one of the more valuable assets, and corporations keep exceeding the limits of my imagination in the terrible things they can do with user information, and the selling of user data distresses me because of that. I can't really overcome my innate distrust of the corporations developing this technology. It's probably obvious at this point. Even with smaller entities or researchers developing these tools, I'm kind of proceeding with any evaluation of a new tool on the basis that if it's successful, it's probably going to get bought up. I don't want to be responsible for advocating for the next service that ends up turning on its users or fizzling out and trying to use a contract with the public institution to offset losses. That's all I've got. Sam.
Sure, thanks, Joey. I want to piggyback a little bit off of what Joey's been talking about, but also maybe take a slightly different tack. So in the kind of research and writing that I've been doing around what we'll continue to call AI for the moment comes from a Marxist perspective that sees the latest developments in generative AI technologies as really part of a longer tradition of automation and labor replacement. So the basic Marxist theory of technology is stored up living labor, which can be put to work to replace human beings within the labor process, but they have a significant difference from human beings in that they can't produce surplus value. All of the surplus value that went into the production of the machine has already been deployed. You can't transfer more value to a commodity using a machine than you put into it, which is something that you can do with human labor. Nonetheless, capitalism is always looking to deploy technologies in order to replace more and more human labor under the mistaken idea that it will somehow free itself from ever having to rely on human labor again, and that somehow surplus value and profit will continue to rise. So the latest artificial intelligence moment is driven by hype, but there is something lying underneath the hype, which is a kind of new round of automation. And in this sense, it's automation of intellectual labor, it's automation of creative labor, and other kinds of labor that had previously been protected or considered non-automatable. And this is in a long tradition. The last round of really disruptive automation was the introduction of robotics into assembly lines in the 1970s, which is kind of considered the hallmark of the shift to a neoliberal political economy. And it should go without saying, but I want to underline the fact that collections are collections of texts, whether they're videos or articles. They are collections of exactly the kind of things that the current artificial intelligence moment is using to train new models. The tools that are being rolled out are obviously AI tools based on previously trained models, trained on corpuses of texts. And so you have two things going on from my perspective. One is a kind of dynamic where more and more labor is withdrawn from the tools and the interfaces that we're using. So the more things like research assistants get rolled out or automated summaries get rolled out, the less the labor that went into producing the underlying texts kind of counts or matters. Students are subject to the same logic of capitalist efficiency, which says you should simply rely on research assistants and automated summaries and not go expend any more labor than you have to by reading the underlying content. That's one side of the dynamic. The other side of the dynamic is the positioning of technology companies and collection vendors like Clarivate are technology companies now. As a kind of crisis broker. So they recognize the crisis that the librarians are in to a certain extent or to a large extent. The crisis is a product of their own business practices, but they can then position themselves as helping us to overcome this crisis. So on the one hand, you've got technology being deployed as a labor-saving device, leveraging what Marx called mute compulsion on students, on librarians, on faculty members, on researchers. On the other hand, you've got companies swooping in as crisis brokers to help us to promise to help us mitigate or get over these crises that are, in a sense, part of their own making. And what I worry that we're going to head towards in the library world is a kind of dead internet for libraries, where we no longer see the underlying collections that we're paying for. All we end up seeing are the generative AI bots that have been trained on the underlying data. And then potentially students don't even need to engage with those bots. They have their own bots, which are being used to gut or automate the reading of the underlying collections. So we have two bots talking to each other, and human intellectual labor doesn't enter the process in any form. And then that puts more work on librarians, university administrators, faculty, teachers, to try to accommodate that until our own labor becomes subject to what Marxists call the process of subsumption, and we're rolled into the AI moment there as well. And then the last thing that I'll say is I don't like the term AI. There's a joke that goes around that what the best definition of AI is that it was a bad choice of words from 1956. I think what we're going to see is a deflation in AI technologies, as Joey alluded to. There's this thing called the AI effect, where when these tools are new and a bit mysterious and we don't really have intellectual purchase on them, we call them artificial intelligence. But once they get more tightly scoped and more focused and more built into the workflows that we already have, we refer to them by much more prosaic names. So I do expect AI to drop out of the discourse at some point. I expect the hype bubble to burst, but what we'll be left with are these technologies of automation which fulfill the same role that automation always does in a capitalist mode of production. So I have a kind of strangely, I think, ambiguous position on the AI future that we're heading into. But I'll leave it there and I'll pass it over to Joel.
Thanks, Sam. Hoping that people can hear me here. Just wanted to preface my remarks. I'm an instruction librarian, so I'm a little bit out of context here. So please, nobody quiz me on BibFrame today. So I've been involved with a little bit of AI-based teaching, which I'm going to speak to a bit, but also I have been involved here at Mount Royal with our own assessment of the Primo research assistant. And so I'm going to be speaking to that a little bit too, just what that experience has caused me to reflect on. I don't anticipate having a lot of comments, really. I'm going to be short and pithy here. So I've been involved with assessing the Primo RA here at Mount Royal. We used a Rutgers AI assessment rubric, and myself and a colleague both kind of put the Primo RA through its paces. We did have a few questions about a few issues. First of all was its integration with our CDI. So it was summarizing from resources that weren't in our collections, and we saw that as a problem. I believe that's something that they're working on, and it's coming down the line to improve that. Another concept that came up in one of Aaron Tay's blog posts was this idea of citation faithfulness, which I think is extremely relevant to the AI-powered summary world. It's also true of humans, but how much is this resource being faithfully represented in this synthesis? And then we also had some questions around the Primo RA's own citation practices in the synthetic summary that it was creating. So, you'd have a paragraph of text and you'd have a footnote right at the end, which my partner told me recently is actually permitted in Chicago. I didn't know that, but it's not our best practice to advise citing in that way here at Mount Royal in APA and MLA and stuff. So we wondered if that would be modeling incorrect citation practices. But I think perhaps more importantly, I'm just going to put into the chat here. Just one second. This was from the Primo RA's own documentation about what it claims to be doing. And I have to say that this really has caused me to reflect on library teaching and the interrelation between instruction and collections. So as we see here, the Primo RA is not a replacement for human expertise, but uses AI to automate otherwise time-consuming tasks. We've designed the Primo RA, make it easier to understand topics, their context, and resources published about it. So I threw a sick in there because it's not actually grammatical. But I think this idea of automating otherwise time-consuming tasks is so ideologically rich. And it's actually caused me to look into two pieces that I'm also going to link here in the chat. They're collaborative pieces that the linguist Emily Bender co-authored with an information scientist, Chirag Shah. And these two pieces have totally really informed my thinking around this idea of automating time-consuming tasks. So there are two pieces that they've co-authored. One is called Situating Search, and one is called Envisioning Information Access Systems, What Makes for Good Tools and a Healthy Web. And basically, they're reflecting on information access and whether generative tools are appropriate to the information access and the information retrieval context. So there's just a few quotes that I was going to read from the the Envisioning Information Access Systems paper. So here's one quote from page 8. Generative systems provide a new kind of possibility for interaction, namely conversational chat. However, this comes at the cost of direct access to sources. In the scenario where answers are provided directly from an LLM trained on a large data set, there either is no source for the information, it's a recombination of words or word parts from the training data that does not exist in its entirety or match the information in any source document, or it is not traceable. In the scenario where the LLM is used to summarize information from a duly linked set of source documents, so something like the Primo array, the chat interface still seems likely to discourage exploration of those source documents by foregrounding an appealing, even if possibly incorrect, summary. So they kind of go through in the Envisioning Information Access Systems paper, what would be a context where generative information systems would be suitable for information access, and they come up with these characteristics. So maybe I'll just leave on this because I already feel like I've gone a little over time potentially, but they say potential beneficial use cases for generative AI information access systems would be: what matters is language form and content is unimportant. The ersatz fluency and coherence of LLM output would not be misleading. Problematic biases and hateful content could be identified and filtered. And the LLM was created without data theft, exploitative labor practices, or profligate energy and water use. So then they kind of ask whether current LLM-powered generative systems are meeting those criteria. And they conclude here, I'll just conclude with this quote, actually. Information retrieval is not a subfield of AI, nor a set of tasks to be solved by artificial intelligence. So it's just, I found that to be incredibly, pardon the pun, but generative in my own thinking. If we are going to value the disciplinary heritage of information retrieval and information access, maybe we shouldn't so easily, so quickly kind of just cede the ground to generative systems for information retrieval. So I'll just leave it there.
Sure,
and
I can
pass to Leeanne.
Sure, I'll just jump in. Similar to Joel, I'm kind of an outlier and not in collections, but I'm more on the student focused side of things. And my response right now is, a lot of liaison librarians, as well as a lot of, librarians that are kind of on the researcher student side of things, feel a lot of pressure because you're getting a lot of requests to, do we have access to this? Do we have access to this? And a lot of these AI tools that come with this freemium type, access to get students hooked on their tools has become a huge challenge for us because the student wants to try the tool. They're concerned about, should I know how to use this? Am I going to be disadvantaged if I don't have enough experience using the different tools when I get to the workplace? And I know this because they ask all the time. So it's a very fine balance for us in the library between, realistically, if we jumped into this fully, our collections budget could just be consumed just with AI tools. And it's unnecessary, but I think that we're in a good position to really take a lead on the tool side of things, to be evaluating and examining all these tools. And it is true. I mean, I'm getting constant emails of, I'm sending you this link to our tool so you can look at it. Maybe you're interested in subscribing. I mean, we're all overwhelmed with those. And we all don't have enough budget to buy just the basics of what we actually need. But I think we're well positioned to use our critical thinking skills to be pulling apart the tools. And that's why I say to students and to faculty, just send me what you're interested in and I'll look at it and I'll tell you if this is something that's actually useful for you or something we should be looking at. I'm now starting to get requests from faculty with very specific language saying, does the University of Calgary subscribe to a generative AI research assistant? Or I heard from a colleague at U of T that there's this generative research assistant called such and such. Do we have it? So it is a constant pressure you feel. My biggest concern is that we have to be in the conversation. We have to be included in the conversation so that we don't get kind of our students or our faculty roped into these tools that are garbage and are no good and are not useful and are just costing everybody money. I'm also concerned about what the students say to me, which is the democratizing of AI. Like they feel like, you know, it's unfair that some students can use certain tools and afford to pay for them and other students cannot. So I'm concerned about ensuring that not only are we picking the right tools, if we are picking tools, and where does that budget come from? Who's paying for that? Because I feel like these are in a different category than, you know, a database in the sense that, you know, who is this a cross campus subscription, and should we, you know, should someone else be paying for them? It's just something I've been thinking about. But also, you know, for the students that can't afford and they're seeing other students in their classes, you know, getting, you know, access to this tool that's, you know, super useful for them, and you know, can they, how do we help those students? And it's a concern on the student side of things. They want to ensure that everybody has equal access to the tools if we're using them. But my biggest concern is ensuring that we pick the right tools if we are going to go down that road, and that we evaluate them. And I mean, I know we've all been in those sessions. I think the last one I was in with collections was the Web of Science, and I was shocked. I was like, this is no good. So it's not just an immediate, okay, you know, this publisher came up with this, it must be great. It has to be looked at. We have to evaluate it. Is this useful? And being intentional in our choices of the tools that we do pick, I think is pretty critical as well. I just think that we have to step up on campus to ensure that those conversations happen and that we're involved in them, because we have that skill set to be able to look further than I feel like some other units on campus when it comes to possible, particularly generative AI tools that are out there. And my biggest concern is I don't want, what I'm seeing on most campuses is people have no one to ask. They have no one to ask. They have all these questions about it and I have nowhere to go. So what we're trying to say at the University of Calgary is come to us and, you know, through our center, and we will help guide your question in the best way possible through our expertise as professional librarians. And that's it for me. So I'll turn it back over.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I think we're ready to do questions.